The CEO initiative says President Jacob Zuma needs urgently to establish a commission of inquiry into state capture. Those comments following a meeting with Finance Minister Malusi Gigaba. Joining us now to talk about that meeting and related matters is Colin Coleman, Managing Director at Goldman Sachs International, and he is with us now. Colin, we've had a bit of bridge building going on here because things got very tense between organised representative business and government over the past year. So how did this session go with, he's not a new minister anymore, but he's still finding his way.
So it's 6 months in, and we had a very constructive session with Minister Gigaba, the Deputy Minister, the National Treasury Director General and his team. We focused very much on, so where has the CEO initiative got to in terms of the various work groups. We also focused on the state-owned enterprises and the fiscal impacts thereof. And it was a very constructive session. I think the reality is after 6 months that any person in that position has to deal with the gravity of the fiscal pressures that are before him in this case. I think he's grappling with those issues, and we were trying to be helpful from the business leadership side on the steering committee of the CEO initiative as to what we think may be advisable to be doing under the circumstances.
Harsh words have been levelled at the government by top business people in South Africa, and that's been new relatively. In the past, the old days, business leaders preferred not to comment, do things quietly. That hasn't been the case. So the trust issue comes up. I mean, what is the sense of the level of trust now? There's rebuilding, but is there trust?
Well, the fact is the government is the government, and business has to work with the government, and we have to deal with the issues. You know, we have called for a commission of inquiry that the President has committed to bringing about, and we think it's urgent to do that.
But he's already said he's going to do it.
He would, but I think the question of the definition of how it's done, who it's done by, etc., as the public prosecutor has made her proposals in that regard, and we have to hear what the President decides. But more generally, I think there are a range of fiscal questions. You know, the SAA question arises. Systemic organizations like Eskom, which have both a governance element to it, but there's a very short line between a governance and a fiscal issue that has to be addressed. And so there are many of these issues that we believe have to be dealt with. What we can't afford is for South Africa to drift at this point in time with low growth, high unemployment, high levels of poverty, as we saw in the Stats South Africa report last week. And we have to try and deal with the issues restraining growth.
Well, also there's his 14-point plan. Now, a plan always sounds good, 14 points. Not enough to revive the economy. The commentary has been nothing changes as a result of this plan, so it's yet another plan. You mentioned the SAA issue and the need to find money from somewhere else than the taxpayer. Do you sense that there's a response here from this minister and the Treasury?
Yeah, I think that's why I said it was constructive. I think they briefed us on what they are doing. They're definitely engaging with their cabinet colleagues, trying to find common ground. There has been a committee of ministers created around SAA. The minister said publicly after our meeting that by the end of September they would be reporting back on what their decisions are, that it will be a fiscally neutral funding process of SAA. We gave him our particular views on what a sustainable permanent solution
looks like.
Selling
Telkom shares?
Well, you can't, what you can't do is you can't just plug the fiscal hole and leave the management issues unresolved. How are you going to run the business efficiently and so on? So without going into the detail, we did give him our views. But I do believe that they are listening and grappling with the issues. And we very much discussed the Eskom issues and what those issues look like. Because, you know, SAA we could do without an airline, but we can't do without an electricity company and a well-functioning one that is fiscally sound.
I've yet to see a reason why SAA is a strategic holding. I mean, yes, it would be inconvenient for a lot of people if it were to disappear, but these things need to be thought about. Does the CEO initiative also have a relationship with other departments like economic development, trade and industry? Because Treasury can only do, rather like the Reserve Bank, it can block certain things, it can set parameters for things, but Treasury alone is not going to make the country grow.
Well, Minister Gigaba did inform the press afterwards that President Zuma intends to call all the CEOs together and that all the cabinet members will, who are appropriate in the economic sector, will be present. That's not new, to be honest. We have had engagements with economic development, with a variety of the land affairs departments and so on. But I think if we were self-critical in the past, it's been too centered around the Ministry of Finance, and obviously the Minister of Finance needs all his other colleagues, particularly public enterprises and other like departments, telecommunications and others, to play ball with an economic structure reform agenda. And we're hoping to mobilize more support in that regard.
You said earlier it's the government. There's only one government. You have to deal with them. You also have a risk here of credibility. You know, you're representing business. It's CEO's initiative. There's business leadership as well. It's a delicate line that you have to walk here, isn't it? Because you can't appear to be pandering to government when they don't do what you ask for. Minister Pravin Gordhan, a long time ago, asked and said he would be putting a new board in at SAA by the end of February. This is 2 years ago. Never happened. President obviously blocked it. That board essentially is still in place.
Actually, they did put a partly new board in place.
But the chairperson is still there.
Stayed in place. And the expectation is at the AGM of SAA that she will be replaced by a new person. That remains to be seen. Obviously, government make government decisions. We can only point up the good corporate practices, you know, how long a chairman should stay in place of any company. We can point out the consequences of the CEOs of companies being properly empowered, the right role of a shareholder like the government. And that's particularly true, by the way, with Eskom. I think that we are somewhat impatient with regards to Eskom and the governance of Eskom. And we've told the minister in no uncertain terms that we expect that there will be a permanent, suitable chairman of Eskom put in place soon.
So, your credibility, you are happy that you're able to walk this line?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you know, the concept of truth, speaking truth to power, doesn't mean you replace power. We have whoever this is in power, and we have to deal with that. But we have to tell them, in the interests of the economy, in the interests of the people of South Africa, what we as the business sector see as appropriate behavior and what we think is the best guidance. We have, in April, spoken to the President. We made some certain suggestions. He has acted on some of them, like the FICA bills being signed. And we are waiting, particularly with respect to the Eskom and with respect to the investigation into state capture. We're expecting those answers, and we would like to see progress made in the short term.
That is Colin Coleman. He is Managing Director at Goldman Sachs International and with the CEO Initiative.